Kazuma Kaneko is a very interesting man, with a legacy as the demon painter being cemented into Atlus canon, the more dedicated fans knowing how integral he was to the worldview of some of your favorite Megaten games, including Persona 1, 2, 3, Digital Devil Saga, Raito, and Nocturne to name a few. If you frequent my channel, you know him pretty well. And if you frequent Atlus a lot lately, you might have noticed that he's not really that prevalent anymore. Today we're going to talk about something that's mildly compelling, and something that with the more time that passes, the more I kind of believe in it. Let's talk about the Kazuma Kaneko Conspiracy. So here's the conspiracy. There's bad blood between Kazuma Kaneko and Atlus. There's a lot of evidence for this, but let's go back to one of the earliest discussions on Kazuma Kaneko's disappearance. This begins mostly with Persona 3. Before we talk about this though, I want to quickly press how important Kazuma Kaneko was to Megaten. Although Kaneko didn't join Atlus at the time Megami Tensei 1 was released, he did end up joining Atlus literally because of that game. His first game was Erika and Satoru, and if you want to know a funny story about that, I do have a video on that game. It's linked in the card. He worked on a few other titles, but the most important one for him was Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei 2, released in 1990. And this was the first game that started to break away from the series of Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, the novel series that the first game was based on. Kaneko's demon designs, more than his human designs, became quite popular. Popular enough for Kaneko to begin to use a pseudonym. This was explained in DDSnet Volume 1. If you want to know what DDSnet is, I also made a video about that. It'll be in the cards. Anyway, this is what he says in that issue. When drawing the demons for this work, my name goes from Kazuhiro Kaneko to Kazuma Kaneko. The name Kazuma Kaneko has the number of the devil in ancient Jewish numerology, like the 666 beast. In other words, when you're on one horse, you have the power of the devil, so nothing strange happens. This is kind of a play on his name because Kazuma Kaneko could be translated to something like one horse or golden horse, but it also has the numerological phenomenon of 666. Puns are very integral to Kaneko's character. And yeah, his name actually is Kazuhiro Kaneko. His pen name is Kazuma, and it became more like a art collective name in a lot of ways. If you want to know more about that, I made a video on Kaneko's art team. It'll be in the cards. He is also included in the OST booklet as being a big shot, one of the 4 demons at Atlus, according to the interview section, which again praises his demon design, and it being released in 1991, it's the oldest mention that I found so far of him being called the Demon Painter, one of many variations of that nickname. The best one, however, is the Devil Graphicer. At Atlus, titles and credits weren't an exact science for the first 20 or so years of its life, where they also cultivated a culture where anyone at any level could contribute ideas and feedback. Over time, this led to Kaneko himself being a bit of a bigwig. The shift from Kazunari Suzuki to Kaneko, Okada, and Isogai began with the story elements and themes in Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2, and If, and a lot of that came from Kaneko. He and Okada became the faces of Atlus, prominently featured in interviews for games, DDSnet, and events like Tokyo Game Show and E3. He had a regular column for Game Review magazine from 1996 to 1999. He had another in B Club from 1995 to 1998. He was known making friends with Kojima, Araki, and being renowned enough to be a name that's a draw for a slew of talented artists to commit to working on Shin Megami Tensei 4. I think you get the point, kind of. He had become very integral to the lifeblood of what makes Atlus, well, Atlus, as important to them as Nomura is to Square, or Toriyama is to Square, or Kobayashi is to Square. If you ever wanted to know how important Kazuma Kaneko was to Atlus, he has over 100 interviews about his art, his games he worked on, the collaborations he had, his thoughts and feelings about various things. Okada has around 80, Soejima has less than 60, and Doi has 6. Satomi has 8, Hashino has 63, and Isogai has 5. The shift really started with Persona 3. Up to that point, Kaneko handled the art for the three main Megaten branches, Devil, Summoner, Persona, and Shin Megami Tensei. His heavy interview presence died in the mid-2000s as well, and his last Atlus-related interview being in 2010 for Strange Journey Reminiscence. If you want to know more about that, I made a video about that. It'll be in the cards. Though this one probably should be watched because the context is helpful for this video. To be brief though, if you want me to just explain it, he expressed that he essentially wanted to pass the reins onto the newer, younger staff. His final Megaten related interview at all was actually for Persona 20th Anniversary, the festival book. Persona 20th Anniversary was like 2017 or so. This sparsity also coincides with his dwindling direct involvement. By the mid to late 2000s, the whole roles don't really matter philosophy was less relevant, and it's very present in the last few Kaneko positions. For Devil Survivor, he supervised the project and designed a few new demons. Persona's PSP port, he worked as an art director. Strange Journey was his last major production where he provided the original concept for the story, the character design, supervised the graphics, and produced the game. And even those roles are not exact. You can watch my Strange Journey documentary for more info about his production role. The other two Persona PSP ports, he was simply credited for his original character and Persona designs. For the 3DS Soul Hackers port, he was only credited with the original character and demon designs. For Desu 2 and Overclocked, he was only credited as the devil designer. Same with Persona 1, Arena, Record Breaker, Persona Q2, Persona 5 Strikers, SMT5, Soul Hackers 2, Nocturne HD Remaster. But for SMT4 and Apocalypse, he was credited for the original scenario as well as the demon design. And for Persona 5 and Royal, he was credited for the demon design and modeling supervisor. And that role for Persona 5 Royal was his last true contribution. That game released in 2019. So why do people think he's being mistreated and there's bad blood? Well, if we take Kaneko's word, then maybe there's some angst about him leaving. Maybe the change was something that Kaneko wanted but Atlus didn't want. Maybe it was the reverse and something Atlus wanted but Kaneko didn't. Though to add a little more context, for the Digital Devil Apocalypse art book, Kaneko said about his role at Atlus, "I want to do more than drawings. I also want to be involved with the goods design. I would love to help young talents develop. My hope is that I too will be influenced by all kinds of people around me. And since my current job is here, I hope that in the future I'll be able to influence others in turn. It would make me so happy. Then years later, I would be so happy if a producer said, 'Megaten inspired me to create this work.'" This lines up with his remarks in Strange Journey Reminiscence. In response to being told that the interviewer wants to play a new Megaten that Kaneko planned, this is what Kaneko said in reply. "I think that would be quite difficult. If you come up with a plan like Ishida did this time, you'll probably have to incorporate your own ideas and images into it and produce it. I've had a lot of experience in the front lines of development in the past, and I've had a lot of fun. There were far fewer of us then than there are now, but there were times when my colleagues and I would argue about this and that while fine-tuning the timing of the dialogue display. There were times where we got in trouble just before the last train and had to hurry up because the train would be gone if we didn't finish soon. We had to hurry up. It was tough, but it was really fun. But now, I have to hand that over to someone else. From now on, different people will have to have such experiences." I think it's safe to say Kaneko wanted to move on, as something he says in 1999 is in line with literally what he said in 2010. 2019 is where the conspiracy actually starts though, because until then, people just kind of wondered about his diminishing responsibility. First Persona, when Persona 3 didn't have his input on story or his art. Then in SMT4, when his story was only partially used, and the art was decidedly not Kaneko, instead being mostly guest artists and Masayuki Doi. And it's important to note that some of those artists only took the role because of Kazuma Kaneko. If you want to know more about the guest artists, I made a video on that. I'll probably put that in the cards as well. Tomoto Shinohara, who made the greatest effort to provide demon design that suited Megaten, and name dropped that he was a big fan of Kaneko despite not knowing anything about Megami Tensei, he was simply a fan because he owned all the Kaneko art books. Keita Amamiya calls Kaneko the father of form and design, and Amamiya being involved because of Kaneko caused not only him to join, but people joined because Keita Amamiya was involved. His last words from his time at Atlus were from the Persona 20th anniversary book, but it doesn't really contain any hint on how he feels or his trajectory at the time. So I think the conspiracy really popped off during two pivotal moments. Sega Fest in 2019 featured a love letter to Megaten. This was the shrine to all of Megaten. Atlus featured all titles, including the Print Club 2 booth, basically every Atlus game on display, Emma's with art by Masayuki Doi and other staff at Atlus, Doi's own Hyaki Yagyo, which is a popular genre art piece that Kaneko had actually done once before himself. What made it interesting is that it featured a lot of design documents on display as well as art on display. This intersects with a comment posted on an Atlus tweet showing the jukebox from Catherine Full Body. The original Catherine had music from Megaten titles like Nocturne and DDS, but these were removed from Full Body's jukebox. A fan replied lamenting about that, and a Japanese fan, going by Yumi Horse, said this in English: "I'm not surprised. Did you know they even did this?" At the Atlus exhibition, all of the Kaneko art was not written in his name. Standard practice. Author, material, age. This means that, other than his fans, people don't even know who the paintings came from. And this tweet kinda went viral within the Megaten community. It shook the community, with a lot of people running with the idea that Kaneko is somehow being poorly treated because, well, they couldn't even credit him. Yumi Horse, however, failed to mention that Atlus didn't credit any of the art. All of the descriptions just explain where it was used, and that's about it. So Soejima work, Doi work, etc., none of it was credited. Not that that was a justified choice, but it doesn't read to me necessarily as being specifically malicious towards Kaneko, unless they were being so malicious that they wanted to not credit Kaneko at the cost of not crediting these other individuals. He goes on in reply to someone by sharing another revelation. Kaneko's art books no longer featured Kaneko's copyright. Now, what makes this interesting is that the Kaneko Works volumes 1 through 3 were actually reprinted in the late 2010s. And yes, the reprints actually removed his copyright. And further releases, volumes 4 through 10, all removed the copyright as well. This is interesting, and I think I could explain this away too. Back when I made my Strange Journey documentary with the ear-splitting transitions, I mentioned Kaneko quit. I mentioned it in another video called Kaneko is Gone as well. Tracking his time at Atlus, the final project he worked on was Persona 5 Royal, where he was credited for demon design and modeling supervisor. This was likely due to the new 3D models for demons that he designed being included, and maybe they just wanted feedback on how the demon should look in the round. That game released in 2019. His books began their reprints in like 2018. I believe that sometime in 2018 or maybe even late 2017, that was probably his final moments at Atlus. And I think that this was around the time he and Shiraishi seemed to have left Atlus. Yumi Horse, however, offers an extra nugget wherein he says that at the Sega Fest event, when asking if Kaneko is okay, Atlus staff say that they can't answer that question. I think this kinda is a loaded situation. It could mean so many things. As a Kaneko enjoyer myself, I know that Kaneko values his privacy and is not particularly open, so this could just be that people at Atlus were respecting his privacy. I know from experience that the people who staff events at Tokyo Game Show are usually people who work to some capacity at Atlus in their headquarters, whether it's testing, writing, modeling, etc. So there's also a chance that they might know something, but there could be something like an NDA, or maybe they just don't want to gossip during an event where they're working, Kaneko is spoken very highly of. It's why they respected his opinions when they used his story in SMT4 and sought all of those opinions throughout development. It's why he had many friends and was pretty good at keeping them. When Koji Okada revived from the dead and did an interview, one interesting quote retweet about the interview was from Kazuyuki Shindo. Shindo worked on projects for Square Enix, some of them including Final Fantasy XIII, Romancing Saga, and The Bouncer. He explains that he initially applied to work at Atlus and interviewed with Kazuma Kaneko and Koji Okada. And ultimately, instead of being hired by Atlus, they gave him advice on how to better promote himself, essentially. And he used that information to apply to work at Square Enix and got that job and still works there to this day. He goes on to say that he respects Kaneko and Okada. Another person who knew Kaneko, Chiaki Ogishima, said that Shindo's story tells a lot about the two men's personalities and that they really were just sincere people. All of this to further the point I made when I stated that Kaneko wanted to lift up new talent and let them experience the joys and perils of game development that he experienced in his youth. It probably wasn't just fluff that he was saying, and it probably wasn't something he was saying out of coercion. It probably was just something that he actually felt. And I genuinely think he left on his own accord. Whether or not he's blacklisted as a topic of discussion is probably more a question of whether his retirement upset Atlus or not. He's still credited, even if the credits kind of diminish his impact on the franchise. But it's a lot more than what basically every other former staff gets. His art is being used in merch and stuff a lot lately, showing up in a flood of Persona Anniversary merch. And sometimes his art's done disrespectfully, like when they peed all over his Nocturne art. I don't know. While trying to conceptualize and objectively consider why they're acting weird, I get the feeling that it's more related to a subtle uncertainty with Atlus. They don't seem to be sure whether they want to be creatives driven anymore. Sometimes we get names and faces front and center on only some projects, and sometimes that's not really the case. While propping up known figures like Soejima, they have this weird spotty recognition that they sometimes give to other creatives like the non-Meguro music guys or the non-Soejima Persona art team members. And sometimes they have directors and producers who aren't Katsura Hoshino and Kazuyuki Yamai and Eiji Ishida talk, including the new face of Persona, Kazuhisa Wada. But I don't know. What do you think? Am I giving Atlus too much credit, or is this just as nefarious as Yumi Horse makes it out to be? Thank you to my channel members, A Lie Remains a Lie and FF12 Kid. You guys are funding my Persona 5 documentary, and if that flops, there's like an inconceivable amount of money that went to waste on that project, kinda. Thanks to Nawell for the thumbnail. I started commissioning him to spice things up, so that's another channel expense, and it really does work. His art is fantastic. Commission him for all your art needs, link in the description. And yeah, also this is my Halloween video, so that's probably why the intro is a little weird. I hope you enjoyed it. The Persona 5 documentary will probably drop near Halloween, so that'll be very confusing for you guys. It's gonna be delayed because I have like 33 more interviews to translate and mine for important nuggets. Thank you for watching, and goodbye, fellow Bag of Tennis. Also buy my merch.